major political developments occurred during the 1960s, do you know?
What major political developments? Now, you've got to remember that I grew up in Australia, so my perception of world politics was perhaps different if I'd grown up in the United States. But Australia was in foreign policy following the lead of the United States in trying to stop communism. So I would say that one of the major political developments that I saw in the 60s was this ongoing struggle between communist and anti-communist forces throughout Asia especially, and that led to Australia's involvement in Vietnam, which was began for Australia in 1966. 1965. Now, I was a teenager, and this directly affected me because I had neighbours who were called up. There was a draft, and it's called conscription, and they got called up. And I got called up as well, but because I got admitted to university, my call-up notice was deferred, and then the war ended. But so I would say that the major political developments that I saw was that in the unfolding of struggle between communist and anti-communist forces, with the United States leading the way.
Do you remember any advancement in technology or any new inventions that changed your life?
Yes. Well, for a start, television. Television didn't arrive in Australia until the late 1950s, and we didn't get a television set until 1962, which is pretty late, because they were expensive. They became cheaper eventually, and that was a huge change in technology. And so that would have been the major thing that I remember from my childhood. As the 60s unfolded, I can remember the emergence of the first computers that I saw. The first computer that I ever saw was the size of an entire room, and it had multiple reels of tape, of actual audio tape and so on. And this friend of mine, it was at university, and this friend of mine pointed it out. We used to go and visit the computer like you'd visit an animal in a zoo and just look at it and watch it, the tapes whirring around and everything like that. I had no idea what it could do, and I had no idea, none of us knew that it would eventually become what it is today. But that was a major change.
Can you recall a national, state, or local tragedy that directly impacted or indirectly impacted your life?
Yes, natural disaster in Australia when I was young was devastating bushfires that killed many people, that destroyed a lot of property, including my parents' vacation house, and that was a major event when I was 1962, devastating forest fires.
What were some of your favourite sports from the 1960s? Do you know?
Yep. Australian rules football, tennis and cricket were the three sports that I was obsessed with. Just couldn't get enough of it. Those were the things that all my friends played and that I played, and we just hours and hours of playing those three sports. No rugby, that wasn't in Southern Australia. Aussie rules football.
During this decade, what major wars or military commitments was the United States engaged in, do you know?
Yeah, well, I've already spoken about Vietnam, and that was the central one. But there were also, internationally, that I can... One of the first things that I can actually remember was liberation and national independence struggles in Africa, in places like Kenya, where people were fighting for national liberation from British rule, from British colonial rule. And I can remember, when I was probably 7 or 8 years of age, those events happening, and that being the most significant and the most frightening thing that happened to me when I was 10 was the Cuban Missile Crisis. And even in faraway Australia, it was a big deal. And I can remember, so it was October 1962, and I was in the 5th grade in primary school. And I can remember the principal coming into our room, and he rarely ever did that, and very, very seriously, quietly telling us that there were some dangerous things happening in the world, and that we needed to understand that this was very serious. And sort of walking away from that, and then just forgetting all about it, and not really understanding the fact that the civilization could have ended at that time, and we would have been vaporised, and Australia would have been definitely a part of it and a target and everything like that, no question about it. And you think back on it, and you see the seriousness of it. But when I was at that age, I was serious for 5 minutes, and then you went off with your mates and you played football, or went outside and played. And our parents didn't talk about it. My parents didn't talk about it at all. They must have been worried sick. But the Cuban Missile Crisis was definitely the signature moment of when world events and the potential of war impacted my childhood.
Right, thank you.
You bet. No worries.